She was 74, he was 76, and all they wanted was to feel alive again. Wearing old sweatpants and a hoodie, she took her first shaky step onto the famous rocky stairs. Beside her, her husband held her hand, not to guide her, but to remind her she could still do it. A few tourists watched, some smiled politely, but no one expected it, because halfway up those stairs, a mysterious man appeared at the top. Hoodie, sunglasses, silent, watching. When he took off his hood, the entire place froze. It was Sylvester Stallone. What happens next left everyone in tears and turned this elderly couple into a global inspiration. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this move you, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow at 6 p.m., we'll bring you another unforgettable journey. He held her hand like he was holding time. The air was sharp, laced with the smell of wet stone and pine, as a light snow drifted across the gray morning sky in Philadelphia. At the bottom of the famous steps of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, where Rocky once made his defiant, triumphant run, stood George Dawson, 76, in a gray hoodie and a look that mixed amusement and concern. Beside him, Margaret, 74, clutched his hand. Her breath came in delicate puffs. A pink knit cap hugged her white curls, and the cane in her left hand trembled slightly. A group of joggers passed them, not noticing. One or two tourists were taking selfies higher up. No one knew that the greatest climb of the day wasn't going to be it was going to be symbolic. Just 3 months ago, Margaret couldn't move her left. A stroke had frozen her speech, her smile, her gait. Here she was, standing at the base of the steps where cinematic legend was made, dressed in the same worn-out sweatpants she wore for physical therapy, smiling as though this were the Olympics, because to them it was. They hadn't planned for this, but Margaret had whispered something one morning during coffee, her voice still slightly slurred. "Before I forget, I want to feel that climb." George laughed at the stairs. "I'm old, not done." And just like that, the seed was planted. Therefore, for the next 8 weeks, George became her coach, her handrail, her Rocky. He played "Gonna Fly Now" every morning as she struggled to walk across the living room. He counted steps louder than her doubts. He never told her how much his prosthetic knee ate. He never let her see him wince. They trained in silence and in music, in laughter and frustration. Neighbors began to notice, then joined. Their granddaughter Nora, a digital media student, started filming little clips and uploading them under the hashtag Margaret V's The Steps. It gained a few likes, then hundreds, then thousands. Now here they stood, at the foot of the very place that changed a fictional man's life, and indirectly, theirs. George exhaled deeply. "You ready, champ?" Margaret's lips curled into a crooked smile. "I was born ready. Just took 74 years to prove it." The first step felt like Mount Everest, but she took it. Then another. George stayed beside her, not holding her, just close enough to catch her if she fell. 10 steps in, a small group of teens paused and started filming. 15 steps. Someone began humming the Rocky theme. 20 steps. Margaret stumbled. The cane wobbled. Her foot slipped. George moved instantly. But she shook her head. "Don't! I got this!" He backed off. Nora, from below, zoomed in. She was crying. By step 34, Margaret was trembling. By step 46, her body leaned far too left. She paused, looked down. That's when it happened. From the top of the stairs, a man appeared. Hoodie, sunglasses, silent, watching. George noticed him first, squinted, thought he looked familiar. No, it couldn't be. The man took a step forward. Sometimes it's not the climb that's hardest, it's believing you're still worthy of reaching the top. George had always been the quiet one. While Margaret danced through life, literally for 30 years as a community dance teacher, he was the man in the back, fixing broken tools and silently cooking breakfast every Sunday morning. Their love was never flashy. It was made of grocery lists, laughter over spilled coffee, and hands that always found each other in the dark. But when the stroke hit, Margaret became the fragile one, and George? He became terrified. They never said it out loud, but that hospital room had not because something in her had gone missing. Her rhythm gone, her spark dimmed. At first, he didn't know how to help. He mopped the kitchen 5 times a day. He burned casserole. He prayed quietly, then louder. Until the day he found her in front of the TV, eyes locked on the scene where Rocky throws his fists into the sky at the top of the steps. She had tears in her eyes. He sat beside her. "You always liked this movie," She didn't speak, just nodded. That night she whispered, "I want to climb." They trained, but not without setbacks. Some days she forgot things mid-sentence. Other days, George's knee flared up so badly he had to sit on the floor. Their house became a gym. Their hallway, a track. Their marriage, stronger. Margaret struggled with more than just the physical. She hated mirrors. She avoided cameras. Once, when Nora filmed her walking, Margaret snapped, "Delete that, I look broken." Nora cried. George turned away. Later, Margaret apologized. "I don't want to be remembered like this." George knelt beside. Then let them remember what comes next. And now, with the climb halfway done and the mysterious figure at the top of the stairs watching them, the moment had arrived. But it wasn't just about the man anymore. It was about what had led them both. Flashback. 5 years earlier, Margaret had found a lump in her breast. She'd never told George. She went through tests, treatments, quiet dread, alone. But she beat it. Alone. When George eventually found out, he was heartbroken. "I thought we shared everything." She looked away. "I needed to win that one by myself." Now, climbing those steps, she wasn't alone. But the ghosts of that loneliness climbed with her. George, too, had his secret. The prosthetic wasn't from an accident, as everyone believed. It was from a workplace fall. Because he'd been covering for his... Years ago, their only son, Mark, had fallen asleep. George took the blame, lost his job, took a hit to his leg, never told anyone. When Margaret found out, she only said, "You protected him. Now, let me protect you." Back in the present, Margaret is now at step 57. Her breath is ragged, her hand trembles. George beside her knows what comes next. It's the moment in every movie, the moment the character considers quitting. But Margaret doesn't. She tightens her grip on the cane. "I'm not done." She steps again and again until the man at the top begins to clap, soft, slow clap, clap, clap. Other people join in. Tourists, teens, strangers. George blinks. "Is that?" Nora gasps, drops her phone. "It's him," she whispers. The man in the hoodie pulls down the hood. "It's Sylvester Stallone." "Yes, really." Margaret stops climbing, looks up, covers her mouth, and says, barely audible, "You came." The hardest steps aren't on the stairs. They're the ones you take when the whole world is suddenly watching. Stallone didn't speak at first. He just stood there, arms crossed, sunglasses shielding his eyes, a silent monument to the character he created, the one who made those very steps iconic. Margaret froze. Her breath fogged the air. She looked to George for confirmation that this wasn't a hallucination caused by exhaustion or hope. "It's really him," George whispered, stunned. "Sly's here." The growing crowd hushed. Phones were out, filming. The moment wasn't just real. It was global now. Live streams, hashtag, applause that echoed like thunder. But Margaret's body was trembling. She had 10 steps left, just 10. And suddenly she wasn't sure she could take even one more. Nora was crying. "You're almost there, Grandma. You've got this." George leaned in. "Want me to carry you the rest?" Margaret shook her head slowly. "No, I need to finish what I started." Therefore, she closed her eyes, and with the eyes of the world, her husband, her granddaughter, and Rocky Balboa himself watching, then another, then another. With 5 steps to go, Stallone took off his sunglasses and began to walk down slowly, step by step toward her. Each clap echoed like a heartbeat. She stumbled again. George gasped. Stallone didn't flinch. He extended his hand. "I've seen a lot of champions in my life, but none quite like you. And just like that, she reached the top. The crowd erupted. A chant broke out. "Margaret! Margaret! Margaret!" She stood still, tears running freely down her cheeks, arms stretched into the sky. Then Stallone leaned into her ear and whispered something. Only Margaret and George heard. What he said, millions of people watched Rocky run up those steps, but today, I watched someone make those. That was the climb wasn't about honoring a movie. It was about reclaiming life. Later, in a nearby cafe, after the crowds had left, Stallone sat with the couple. Cameras were gone, just the three of them, and Nora, who captured it all. He asked questions, listened, laughed when Margaret teased him about aging better than Rocky. Then came the twist. Stallone pulled a worn black bag from under his chair, opened it. Inside was the original Rocky robe, the one from the training scenes, faded, historic. He handed it to George. For the man who trained a real fighter. George was speechless. Then he turned to Margaret and gave her a small polished stone, engraved with just one word. "What's this?" she asked. "It's what we do," he said, "when life knocks us down." Again. They hugged, not staged, not for a camera. Real, private, human. But just as the emotional high settled, Nora's phone buzzed. Notifications exploded. The video of the climb had gone viral, over 10 million views in 4 hours. Comments flooded in. "I watched this with my grandma. We both cried. I didn't know I needed this. Now I do." Heroes don't always wear gloves. Sometimes they walk with a cane. Therefore, the family was invited to talk shows, health foundations, motivation conferences, but they said no to most. They didn't want fame. They wanted one thing, to keep climbing, together. Still, the climb changed something deeper. At dinner that night, Margaret held George's hand and whispered, "I feel like I'm alive." He smiled. "You are." She leaned closer, "But I'm scared. What if that was the last big moment?" George shook his head slowly. "The biggest moments are the ones no one sees. Like when you kept going, even when I couldn't walk beside." And then, just before bed, Margaret pulled out the stone again, rolled it between her fingers, whispered, "Again." The world watched her climb. But what made her unforgettable was that she didn't do it for them. She did it for herself. 1 week later, Stallone calls again, this time with a request that no one expects. The world had already cheered, but what came next was just between them. The week after the climb was a whirlwind. Letters from around the world, news interviews, fan art, voice messages in broken English saying things like, "I showed this to my mom. She smiled for the first time in months. This story healed something in me I didn't even know was broken." Nora taped everything to the living room wall. Messages from India, Argentina, Iceland. Nurses messaged her saying they played Margaret's climb in hospitals during rehab session. Margaret didn't quite know. 1 minute she was laughing, crying, lost in thought. George let her be. That was his. Sat beside, held her hand when her. Then, one quiet Friday afternoon, the phone rang. It was him again. "Hi, Margaret," came the unmistakable voice. "How's the champ?" She smiled, emotional. Still standing. George leaned in as she put it on speaker. "I've been thinking. You've inspired millions? And me too. So, I have one more idea. Would you both do me the honor?" Margaret looked at George. He was already nodding. "Name it." 2 weeks later, they were back on the steps. But this time, it wasn't about them. There were no reporters, no live streams, no thunderous chants, just a dozen children, kids with prosthetics, in wheelchairs, kids who walked with braces, and some who couldn't walk at all. Each wore a t-shirt that read, "Climb at your own pace. One step is enough. Be your own Rocky." Stallone's new initiative was launching Steps of Strength, a yearly event for anyone at all, to conquer what the steps meant to them, even if they only climbed one. Margaret and George were the guests of honor. That morning, under a soft sunrise, Margaret didn't charge up the stairs. She took them slowly, beside a 7-year-old girl with no legs, 2 pink prosthetics, and a dream of becoming a dancer. George stayed near a boy in a wheelchair. Together, they raised one arm in the air, fists up, and behind them, Stallone watched, not as a star, not as a legend, but as a man who knew when to pass the... That was the real climax, not for the cameras, but for the soul. Later at home, Margaret carefully placed the original Rocky hoodie onto a mannequin in the hallway. Next to it sat the smooth stone he'd given her. One word carved into it, again. That night, they sat on the porch in silence. The sky was endless. The stars didn't seem so far away. Margaret turned to George and asked softly, "Do you think that was our last big moment?" He was quiet for a while, then said, "No, because the moment you stop climbing is the moment you stop living." They said nothing else that night, just held hands like they always had, not gripping for balance or support, but for memory, for warmth, for all the invisible climbs only they would ever understand. He held her hand like he was holding time itself, and maybe he was, but for once, time stood still and watched them climb again. Thank you so much for watching. Your time means everything to us, and we hope this story moved you as much as it moved us. If it did, please consider leaving a comment, sharing the video, and subscribing to the channel, because powerful stories deserve to be heard. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and never underestimate the impact of one small act of courage.